All right, let's go ahead and get started. We'll give people a chance to keep logging in, but we'll begin our program. Good morning. Welcome to the 2020 Georgia Legislative Policy Forum. I'm Kyle Wingfield. I'm the President and CEO of the Georgia Public Policy Foundation, and we appreciate you for joining us here on this fifth event of the Revamped Forum. That's right, we're embarking this morning on our fifth event in a weekly series that is taking the place of what over the past decade was traditionally an all-day policy conference. But like so much in our society, we've had to adapt to the current circumstances. And in fact, that's the theme for this year's event: wisdom, justice, and adaptation. If you missed the first four events about education, including our opening keynote with U.S. Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos, as well as the budget and land use and transportation, you can find the final recordings of those events on our YouTube channel at Georgia Policy. After today's panel, we'll be back here the next 2 Tuesdays at 11 a.m. to explore the ways Georgians are adapting when it comes to housing and healthcare. And you won't want to miss our panels of local and national experts on those important issues. We are grateful for the support of some of our key sponsors during this series. Sorry, I was going to share my screen, but I'm not allowed to. So you'll just have to take my word for it that they are presenting sponsor AT&T, platinum sponsors Verizon and the Walton Family Foundation, and silver sponsor the Georgia Association of Realtors. We thank each of them for their support of this event, which has allowed us to offer this year's outstanding lineup of speakers at no cost to our audience. We would, however, appreciate your voluntary support of our work, and you can visit georgiapolicy.org/donate to make a tax-deductible contribution. Now, during this morning's program, we would like to hear questions from you in the audience. You can submit those to us in the chat or Q&A boxes on your screen. Just type your question there. We'll try to get to as many as we can in the time we have. We have a great panel lined up to discuss the economy. Before we get started, I'll remind everyone that the program with all of our panelists' full bios can be found on our homepage, georgiapolicy.org. Now I'll turn things over to Gerard Robinson, who not only is a past participant in the Georgia Legislative Policy Forum, but was recently named Vice President for Education at the Advanced Studies in Culture Foundation. Thank you, Gerard, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kyle, for the kind introduction, and thank you for your leadership. I've been a fan of your shop for quite some time, and glad to have a conversation about the economy. I know a lot about Georgia in part because I consider it a second home. My oldest daughter went to public schools in Georgia. The middle daughter was born in Georgia, still own a home in the Atlanta area, so investing in the economy. But like all of us, we didn't expect to wake up in the early part of this year with the COVID pandemic. And it changed how we think about work, what we think about jobs. It's really changed the fact that unemployment is at a high rate. Over 40 million people have applied across the country. And so lawmakers and employers in particular have to rethink, what does it mean to function as a business in this type of environment? As many of you know, I have a panache for research, and I've had an opportunity to participate over the past 3 years in a partnership with Gallup through a partnership with the Center for Advancing Opportunity in Washington, D.C. And what we do every year is we publish a report called The State of Opportunity in America. And through this report, we ask people from around the country questions about education, criminal justice, and the economy. Well, for this presentation, I'm going to focus on some of the research that people have shared with us about jobs, about job creation, why they lose jobs, and whether they're interested in actually starting their own job. So to put this in perspective, we collected data from 6,941 people in 47 states and the District of Columbia. One of those 47 states is Georgia. And so what I'm going to do is walk through just a few of the highlights from the report, provide you a national response and a Georgia response. And I think it will set it up pretty well when the three gentlemen joining me will have a conversation about the economy. So here's one question we asked everyone. At work, do you believe that everybody has an opportunity to do their best every day? The national answer that said strongly agree was 41%. Well, in Georgia, 48% of the people strongly agree with that. So from the Georgia perspective, we're actually above the national average. Second question, your current job makes best use of your talents. The average answer for strongly agree, 31%. Georgia, 32%. Another example of moving in the right direction. We went to the question about what keeps you from getting a job. And in the last 12 months, we asked people to identify the reason why it was tough for them to get a job. My first answer would have been lack of opening. That was surely a top answer. Another would have been lack of jobs in the area. That was a top answer. You know what answer a lot of people picked? Health. It was in fact their personal health that made it tough for them to get a job, whether it was dealing with obesity, hypertension, heart challenges, things that in the COVID environment has really made it tough for people to maintain jobs. The national average, 25% of the people said it was health. In Georgia, it was 30%. And so we actually are higher than the national average, with places like New Jersey, 40%, Virginia, 35%, Massachusetts, 33%. In the last 12 months, what's another reason it stopped you from finding an opportunity to get a job? Another one was lack of access to healthcare. And remember, the data we collected from 6,941 people was before COVID. And so you can assume these numbers have actually gone higher. 16% said that was an issue at the national level. At Georgia, it was 12. But here's one that I want to share that's going to really raise some interesting eyebrows for us. As it relates to education for your job, please rate your level of agreement with the following. I have the necessary education to get the type of job I want. The national average was 29%. Unfortunately for Georgia, it was only 19%. Only 19% of the people said they actually had the education to support the type of job they want. Well, let me put that in perspective. Of the 29 states who answered that question, Georgia finished last, meaning the people who in Georgia said, we just don't think we have the education to do that kind of work. Education can be what we do at the K-12 level. It can take place in what we do in the technical college system for people who are looking for a credential, for a license, or for maybe even an associate's degree. It also says something about our post-secondary education across the board. So while we've identified some areas where residents in Georgia are doing pretty well in the economic sense, we also have some challenges, particularly with education. And as someone who works in the field of K-20 education, that's one that I think we need to work on. So that's what people are saying across the country and what they're saying in Georgia. We're now going to talk to three gentlemen who know a great deal about the workforce and about the economy. I'm going to introduce all three, and then I'm going to turn it over to the first person I introduced, which is Representative Kasey Carpenter. He is a representative in our legislature. He's also a small business owner. Following him will be Steve Moore, who's a member of President Trump's Economic Recovery Task Force, and he's co-founder of the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. Following him will be Andy Puzder, who is the former CEO of Hardee's and co-author of Job Creation, How It Really Works and Why Government Doesn't Understand It. As a kid who grew up in Los Angeles, I knew his business as Carl's Jr. On the Western Coast. So what I'm going to do at this point is turn it over to Representative Carpenter, and he will present us with some words of wisdom.
Thank you very much. Appreciate everybody being here today. And Kyle, thanks for your organization for having me. I'm here today, I think, to talk a little bit about how COVID affected my businesses and, how I think that's actually going to go across Georgia and across the United States. So most of you probably don't know me and probably haven't had a chance to read the bio, but I am a state representative from up in Dalton. I'm in the restaurant hospitality business. And so, it was huge on my industry. As most of you know, it devastated our business model pretty quickly. And it's still not where we want to be. We've had to pivot. You'll probably hear that word a lot today as companies try to survive this pandemic and how we've had to pivot to make that work. So I would take you back to March when all this was really happening in Georgia. Of course, it was happening outside of Georgia a little bit earlier, but mid to late March is where we really started seeing a tightening of the economy in the hospitality business. about that third week of March, we went to about 30% of revenue in a week's time. We noticed then the following week, as locals decided that we needed to shut down, that it went down another 10%. So now we're playing baseball at Bruce Benedict's batting average, 20%, unfortunately. And so at that point, we decided what we're going to do. We could shut down. We probably had the cash to do so, but we decided to try to be innovative and try to move to a more of a food box, meat box scenario, so that we could, make enough revenue to keep folks working. And so that's what we did. We pivoted. We started doing some produce boxes to help Georgia farmers, because they also got hit as the supply chain, as restaurants, that whole restaurant industry up the Eastern Seaboard was ruined. We saw that farmers had crops in their field that were about to die, and they had nowhere to go with them. So, but we knew the demand was in the marketplace. We just had to figure out how to get to that demand. And that's kind of what we did in the restaurant too. We knew we talked to our local meat suppliers, and we knew the demand. Customers were spending money at grocery stores and meat markets and whatnot. They were all covered up. And so we just had to figure out a way to, facilitate getting products to those folks. And so that's what we did. And it kind of helped us, 30 went to 40, 40 went to 50. And so other than the catering piece of our business, which is a big piece, we are actually at 100% in both restaurants. As we speak today, we feel like we survived it, and we're hopefully going to grow through the pandemic. But, it's been a really interesting time. And I think the biggest piece that I take away is when you see policies at the national level in regards to unemployment, where you have a certain group of the population that actually got a raise during a pandemic, it just shows the disconnect sometimes between policy and how it really affects the real world people, in the micro levels, if you will. And so we're having a hard time keeping folks working. When you make more money staying at home, it's a challenge. And we're seeing that locally in the carpet industry as well. Most of you may or may not know Northwest Manufacturing Corridor for flooring. And those guys are, the revenue's fine, but it's just finding the employees and getting them to work. When you have all this going on has been the real big challenge. And these are huge warehouses where folks are really not on top of each other. So social distancing is occurring all across these warehouses and manufacturing facilities. But when people can make more money sitting at the house, it's a real challenge. So that piece, and I think, opened my eyes was one of the pandemic companies that maybe had plans, long-term plans, to rush those plans up. So if for us, we had an online app that we were working through that we were going to implement sometime mid-year. Well, obviously with this, we dropped it quick, because otherwise the phone was going to be ringing and we couldn't answer it fast enough. So it sped up the innovative process for a lot of people. It's something about survival, and when your head's next to the flame, you're going to move a lot quicker to try to succeed. So I think we saw that piece. And the other piece is how regulation can pick winners and losers. And when you have, this can stay open, others cannot stay open. And also the things that are required of one industry versus another, how that really puts a bigger strain on folks. And maybe even the inability for restaurants to deliver alcohol, for instance, in Georgia. Things like that take so much time in the legislative process, but you see the impact of not being able to give people the flexibility to survive. It's intensified during this pandemic. So those are some of the things that I've kind of taken away from this whole thing. And, a lot of my coworkers are catering piece. I don't know when that's coming back. This thing is really chosen winners and losers. If you were a grocery store owner or you were a other industries decimated, whether it be, concert venues, whether it be Mercedes-Benz, pro sports teams, stuff like that. So it's been pretty interesting to see the drastic effects on industries, good and bad. So that's my thoughts.
Representative Carter, thank you so much for opening up your personal and professional business as related to this. My first job was working in a restaurant, so I know what kind of great work it is. Stephen, we're going to turn it over to you and let you provide us some wisdom as well.
Can you hear me now? Okay, awesome. Thanks, Gerard, for the nice introduction. Privileged to be with everyone. Kyle, you do an amazing job with Georgia Policy Institute, so I love the work that you do. I'll just make a few comments, and then I can't wait to hear from you all about your questions about what's going on with the economy. I'll start with this. We, about a month ago, we did a report card on the governors across the country and who's doing the best job of balancing the health risks from this pandemic with the obvious importance that you just heard about of keeping our businesses open, keeping our workers employed, and keeping our economy functioning. And I've got to tell you, you should be so proud of your governor in Georgia. He's done an amazing job. And I think Kemp has been, we rank him one of the 3 or 4 best governors in America in terms of his handling of this crisis. And I think he deserves a special amount of praise because he has been so beaten up by the media, which is obviously hates any Republican who dares open up the economy. I'm a big believer, by the way, that when all is said and done, that what has happened in this country in the last 4 months and the lockdown of our economies and our businesses will go down in history as one of the greatest tragedies in the history of our country. It is, I think that the costs to the health of the American people, to our economic livelihoods, to our businesses, to our children, have been multiple times higher than any benefit. We should never do this again. Shut down our commerce and our livelihoods. So congratulations to Governor Kemp. He and governors like the great governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, and Abbott of Texas, and many others have done a really wonderful job. And by the way, the worst governors in America by far in terms of handling this crisis have been, Cuomo of New York and the governor of New Jersey, Phil Murphy, disaster.
There seems to be a momentary break with Stephen. We'll see if he can weigh in 5 seconds. Well, it seems like we have.
If you look at the data, it would actually tell you exactly the opposite. So, Andy, you and I have talked about this in the past. By far the highest death rates. By far, and we're not talking about 10 or 20 or 30% higher death rates or 50% higher death rates. We're talking about 400% higher death rates, 500%, 800% higher death rates. Our states, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and those are the states that had the strictest. Somehow we're going to control their businesses is false. And I say that because there is a big movement on the left to actually shut down again. There were 2 major pieces this weekend that were frighteningly stupid. One was in the Wall Street Journal. I mean, one was in the Sunday New York Times, and the other was in the Sunday Washington Post. Both with, quote, supposed experts, health and economic experts, that said the best way to move forward would be to have a 4 to 6 week national shutdown of our economy. These people are lunatics. That is crazy. That would destroy millions of businesses. It would just flatten our economy. You'd see millions and millions of people in the street, in food lines because they didn't have a job and they didn't have an income. So we have to, as free market conservatives, argue for reviving our businesses and obviously doing it in a safe and effective way. A couple more quick points, and then I'll turn it over to my good friend, Andy Puzder. We do have to worry about this runaway spending in Washington. It is a disgrace what's happened. There is a mythology that obviously the people at Georgia Policy Foundation and most of us understand, but it's amazing how many liberal economists don't understand this. Government spending does not stimulate the economy, period. Hard stop. Government spending does not stimulate anything except government. And what we have seen in the last, by the way, you look at the last GDP report, it's very interesting to look at what happened in the second quarter. We all know that the horrifying numbers that we saw in the second quarter where our economy contracted by 33%. It's something that none of us ever thought we'd see in America, and hopefully we'll never see that again. But what is interesting is we had massive declines in the leisure, the recreation industry, restaurants, bars. You saw huge reductions in the travel industry. You saw big reductions in construction. You saw by the way, people aren't aware of this. The single biggest, Gerard, do you want to guess what the single industry that contracted the most other than hospitality and leisure was? I bet you can't guess because healthcare. This is amazing. I mean, think about this. We're in the middle of the biggest health emergency in the United States history, and healthcare and hospitals were shutting down. And that's because we made so many mistakes in terms of, basically closing down hospitals, and people didn't go for, to get mammograms, or, they couldn't go to people were afraid to go to the hospitals for all sorts of treatments. And that has had an extremely negative effect on our economy. So it's amazing, isn't it, that in the middle of a pandemic, the part of the economy that shrunk the most was healthcare. But the reason I bring all this up is, I bet you can guess this one, Gerard. What industry do you think grew the most in the second quarter?
Government.
Government, exactly. Government. What's wrong with this picture? Government is not facilitating the growth of the private sector. What government is doing is crowding out the private sector. It is basically taking the money that should be going into private businesses and private investment, and it is crowding out. So what we see now, and this is why this debate that we're having in Washington right now is so critically important, not just for the next 6 months or the year or the election, but really for the next 10 or 20 years of our country. Just so you all know, Nancy Pelosi has proposed a bill that would spend another $3 trillion. Now I'm going to pause there. I didn't say $3 billion. I said $3 trillion. It is an outrageous abomination. Anyone who would even take that bill seriously. And by the way, I've actually read most of it. I haven't read the whole thing, but I've read most of it. It is an atrocity. It is basically Nancy Pelosi taking every dingbat left-wing idea that the left has wanted to spend money on for the last 25 years and throwing it in this bill. I mean, there's money for environmental justice grants, and there's money to bail out the Illinois pension system, and there's money for the trial lawyers, and there's money for the teachers unions. Any group that ever gave money to the Democratic Party is getting well paid under this so-called stimulus bill. How dare, we should as conservatives say, how dare Nancy Pelosi use a healthcare emergency where people are afraid about their lives and their livelihoods, and she uses this crisis as an excuse to fund all these liberal left-wing interest groups and policies. It doesn't matter if you're conservative or liberal or independent or Republican or Democrat, everybody should be disgusted by that kind of behavior. And if we were to pass anything, and by the way, Pelosi is smart in some ways. They came out with this ridiculous $3 trillion spending bill. Trump said, well, maybe we'll do a payroll tax and some other things, spend $1 trillion. So of course they said, well, let's split it down the middle. We'll spend $2 trillion. $2 trillion is still way too much money. It's ridiculous that we would spend that amount of money on some of these kind of crazy programs. And the implication of that, and I'll stop with this, if we just did an analysis at the Committee to Unleash Prosperity, if we spent $3 trillion, as Nancy Pelosi is suggesting, for the first time in the history of the United States, government spending at all levels, federal, state, and local spending, would rise to 52% of our GDP. That is to say, government would be producing and taking more of the resources of this country than every private worker and every private business in the United States. I don't think Bernie Sanders, the avowed socialist, in his wildest dreams would have ever thought that day would come when our government sector would be larger than our private. I don't even think that happens in countries like Sweden that are avowed socialist countries. So we cannot allow that to happen. I think Trump really turned a corner in this weekend by proposing and implementing this payroll tax suspension, which is very popular with people. It'll mean a 7.5% increase in their paychecks. And one last quick point is that the most important spending item that Nancy Pelosi wants in her $3 trillion abomination is almost $1 trillion for blue states. This is a high priority that we stop what I call the blue state bailout. That most of that $1 trillion would not go to Georgia. It would go to Illinois, New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, California, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Minnesota, the blue states that are dysfunctional. Every single person in Georgia should be very opposed to any thought of a massive blue state bailout, because it would mean, what it means is people in Georgia have to pay the bills for Illinois and New York and New Jersey and California. And I don't think that would be too popular in the great state of Georgia. And I'll stop there and turn it over to my friend, Andy.
Thank you, Stephen. And thank you for your report on governors. You know, when governors run for office, jobs is a top issue. And if you look at the top 3 line items in the governor's budget, health is one. And so you've touched on great areas. Andy, love to hear your
I want to thanks, Gerard. It's good to see you and good to be here. Kyle, thanks for the invite. And I want to thank Steve and Kasey for great presentations. They covered a lot of ground. So I'm going to try and cover a little bit of what the administration has done right with respect to this crisis, starting with the Paycheck Protection Program, part of the CARES Act. There's a lot of things that I think in retrospect the administration would have done differently that people wish had been done differently. But I think overall, what the government did to react to the emergency, they did pretty well. That's assuming at the beginning that shutting down the economy was the right thing to do. I think we've seen now out of countries like Sweden, for example, that maybe a complete lockdown was not the smartest thing to do long term. But look, once that decision was made, we had to deal with the difficulties created by that lockdown. And a lot of small businesses were ready to close their doors. Having run Carl's Jr. and Hardee's, I'm in contact with a lot of these small business owners, franchisees from when I ran the company, and a lot of them were ready just to lock up and go home. This Paycheck Protection Program, which got most of them loans, was very, very effective in keeping their doors open. It saved about over 51 million jobs. Since the beginning of May through the end of July, we've seen the number of people on traditional state unemployment come down by about 36%. There was real concern in the small business community as to whether or not, first of all, the government program, this program would cover their businesses. And then if it did cover their businesses, would they be able to get a bank to make them the loan? The Treasury Department under Secretary Mnuchin and the Small Business Administration worked very hard to see that that program was implemented. And a lot of restaurant companies in particular, but small businesses in general that would have been gone had it not been for that program are open today. And many of them are doing very well. It's a good lesson here with respect to restaurants for the rest of the country. Delivery, the way you deliver your products has become increasingly important. And we've got restaurants where if you depended on, people coming in and eating a steak and drinking a glass of wine and sitting around and talking, your business is in trouble. I mean, there's a very difficult to duplicate that experience online with third-party delivery or with a drive-through. However, quick service restaurants that have drive-throughs or businesses that were previously known for delivery, like pizza businesses, are actually doing very well. I know people in the quick service restaurant sector, they're actually doing better the last couple of months than they did before the pandemic. This is because about 97% of their business now goes through the drive-through. No dining in business, but going through the drive-through. So how you deliver your product has become increasingly important. But the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, has really produced some very positive results, not least of which is we just had 3 months of the highest job creation in the history of the government reporting the data, which goes back to 1939. Now, you've heard some people out there complaining, particularly in the media, oh my God, July, the numbers came down from where they were previously. Maybe the economy's falling apart. Well, first of all, in July, we had 1.8 million jobs. Economists were expecting 1.5 million jobs. So we beat economists' expectations. Secondly, that was the third best month in the history of the government reporting this data. And it was only third because June was the first best month and May was the second best month. I mean, these are tremendous, tremendous numbers. And I'll put them in some perspective. Over the last 3 months, the economy under President Trump has created 9 million jobs. We went from about 130.5 million jobs to 139.5 million jobs. At the end of the Great Recession in July of 2009, coincidentally, there were about 130.5 million jobs. It took Obama and Biden 5 years and 2 months to create 9 million jobs. In other words, it took them 62 months to create the same number of jobs that the economy just created in 3 months. So these are spectacular numbers. The phrase beats economist expectations has basically become an oxymoron with almost all economic data, whether it's retail sales or manufacturing. I mean, the numbers are very, very strong, and a lot of that's due to actions taken by the administration. Now, what Steve mentioned, and I want to emphasize this, what we just saw with President Trump and these executive orders is a clear distinction between the way the president views the pandemic and the way the Democrats view the pandemic. The president views it as a problem to be solved, and he's addressing it as a problem solver, trying to help American families that are suffering now, that are experiencing financial pain because of the shutdown and the pandemic. The Democrats are very open about viewing this pandemic as an opportunity. Joe Biden called it an opportunity to transform America. And we've heard Clyburn in the House talk about it as an opportunity to enact a policy agenda. So if you agree with that agenda or not, and I'm not trying to be political here, but if you're looking at what's happening, the bill that the Democrats wanted to pass was laced with ideological objectives, such as changing the way we handle our national elections, trying to eliminate a tax deduction for wealthy people in high-end states. All through the bill that they wanted to pass, it was $3 trillion. There were ideological objectives that had nothing to do with relieving the financial pain that's being experienced by the American people. The executive orders that the president enacted, on the other hand, all 4 of them relate to relieving financial pain. If you've got a job, the payroll protection program is going to give you about a 7.5% bonus through the end of the year. That's important because we want to reward work. It's important to encourage work. We just heard about how the $600 a week federal supplement was making it difficult to find people to work. And it wasn't just the case in Georgia. It was the case across the United States. I heard restaurant people talking about that, as well as people at the local grocery store, at the local pharmacy. You ask anybody up until the end of July, and they will tell you that it was hard to hire people because they could make more money staying home. So the president has now lowered that from 600 to 400, but that's a benefit to people who don't have jobs. Now, if you are unable to find a job, the way you're supposed to be able to get unemployment benefits is if somebody offers you a job, you're no longer entitled to collect those benefits. But we want to help people who, because of the pandemic, can't work, and I think the president feels very sincere about that. So wanted to have this $400 offer. That will take the percentage of people who are making more money by staying home down. I think Steve and I would both have preferred a different approach to this issue. And hopefully when Congress acts, it could take a more rational approach, maybe tied to what people earn as opposed to some flat government federally funded bonus. But I think the intent is to hire people that are unable to find jobs. So we have a bonus to encourage people to work, a bonus that encourages people to stay on the job and that benefits people who actually have jobs. And then we have a bonus in place that helps people who aren't able to find jobs. The other 2 elements of these executive orders, the holding off, having HUD work to try and help people avoid being evicted, and also trying to help students who are saddled with debt from having to pay interest currently on those debts, taking the interest rate down to 0, again, is intended to help people, but will also help the economy, because when you're worried about whether you're going to be able to pay your rent or whether you're going to be able to meet your student loan obligations, you're not out there spending. And if people aren't out there spending, the economy's not going to recover. About 2/3 of our economic growth is tied to consumer spending. So it's important that we keep people spending, we keep the economy moving forward, and that we get government out of this process as soon as possible. Now, we put government in it very strongly because the government shut down the economy. It wasn't the fault of businesses, it wasn't the fault of workers, it wasn't the fault of consumers that the economy was shut down. It was a virus that came out of China, and we shut the economy down to try and eradicate that virus. Now, it will never be eradicated. And I really shouldn't have said to eradicate it. I should have said level the bell curve. That was what we were trying to do. It's this virus is going to be with us for a long time. Even if there's a vaccine, it may not be 100% effective. It will allow life to get back to normal. But the virus from back in 1918 that really did shut the country down and caused far, far more death is still with us. I mean, people get the flu every year. So these things take a while to kind of work their way out of the system to the point where we can get back to normal. But the intent was to level that bell curve. We leveled it. It's been leveled. We now need to get the country back to work. We need to put policies in place that encourage people to work, that don't discourage people to work. We do need to help people that are still suffering from this, that are having economic difficulties. The economy has not fully recovered. We need to recognize that. But we don't need to do all these ideological things to try and manipulate this pandemic into something to achieve political goals as opposed to solving the problem that we're facing, which is the pandemic. As long as we have a president who keeps that in focus and it focused on pro-growth policies that will grow the economy, I think we'll be in very good shape. And currently we have a president who's willing to do that. Gerard, I think that's about as much as I could say right now. So let's move it on.
Randy, thank you again for your time. Thank you for reminding everyone that 51 million jobs were saved. And thank you for walking with us through the executive orders. All three of you have garnered a lot of excitement. So I've got several questions. This is for everyone. So here's the first. The national debt keeps growing, especially now, but when the economy has been strong. Some economists now argue that debt doesn't matter. Do you agree? And how do you foresee this affecting the country 5 to 10 years from now? Whoever wants to take it.
Well, they're wrong. Let's just start with that. Any small business person knows that you can't borrow your way to success. You can't tax and spend your way to prosperity. And that debt will be a burden for future generations for a long time to come. The only way we can address the debt, the only way we can address our continued deficit spending in a rational manner is if we will have economic growth sufficient to offset it. And if we enact policies that just where we continue to spend and spend and spend, we're not going to have that economic growth. And eventually there will be a day of reckoning. We can't borrow forever. And any economist who says we can borrow forever ought to go back to, so maybe they went to the same school as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who doesn't understand economics either. So it's a ridiculous proposition. Steve, you guys know, you guys can react to this as well as I can, or better.
I obviously agree with everything that Andy just said. I just add a couple of quick points about this. I mean, we're looking at a federal deficit this year, even without the Pelosi $3 trillion abomination, of somewhere in the neighborhood of, well, I'll give you the numbers. So the federal government started the year with a $4.7 trillion budget that they had already appropriated the money for. Then we spent another $2 trillion or so for the first 3 or 4 stimulus plans. So then we were at that, if my math was right, that brings you to about $6.7 trillion. Then we have about $1 trillion or so of state and local spending every year. So that brings you to $7.7 trillion. If you add $3 trillion on top of that, you're talking about $10.5 trillion spending out of a $20 trillion economy. Mm-hmm. And my estimate is that the borrowing, even without the Pelosi plan, will be at least $3 trillion this year, and probably closer to $4 to $4.5 trillion. So those are, by the way, we're talking about trillions of dollars. We're spending trillions of dollars like they're candy. I mean, it's really incredible. I mean, when I first came to Washington in 1984, the entire federal budget was $1 trillion. Now we're talking about borrowing $4 trillion. One last point. I don't like to obsess about the debt, though. I think the most important thing, I mean, Milton Friedman taught us very clearly 30, 40, 50 years ago. Government spending is taxation. Every dollar that government spends is a form of taxation, either taxing people now or taxing people later, right? As Andy said, debts have to be repaid, right, Andy? Debts have to be repaid. And so what we're really talking about is a redistribution. All government doesn't create any wealth, it just redistributes wealth. And by the way, in some cases, government as a redistribution tool is an effective thing. I mean, everyone agrees that in a time of crisis like we've had over the last 4 months, it certainly makes sense to provide aid to people. We don't want people to go hungry. We don't want to have people go homeless. We want to provide them the aid. We're a rich country. We can make sure that we're taking care of our people. But we shouldn't fool ourselves into thinking redistribution is growth. It isn't. The only way that as my friend and Andy, your friend, Arthur Laffer would say, the only way that the federal government can give me $1 is to take $1 away from you, Gerard. It's that simple. I mean, the dollar that the government spends has to come from other people. And so it's a redistribution scheme. And a redistribution does not cause growth. And I'm kind of agitated by this because just before I came on, this Zoom meeting, I was reading this piece by this woman who's a chief economist at Goldman Sachs or one of these muckety-muck investment firms. And she was saying that Donald Trump is going to cost the economy 2 million jobs because he's cutting back the unemployment benefits from $600 to $400 a week. Now, folks, that is economic idiocy. That is the stupidest. This person has a PhD in economics, and she is saying that paying people not to work stimulates the economy. You almost have to have a PhD in economics to say something that stupid, right? I mean, again, and when I'm not saying that people shouldn't get aid for when they're unemployed, they should. $600 is way too much. We have a situation right now where 80% of workers are getting more money for staying unemployed than going back to their jobs, and that's why you have this problem. But to say that paying people not to work is going to create jobs is economics upside down. And that's the reason, we have a study that we did that finds if Donald Trump, and this is key to to what's going to happen over the next 4 or 5 months in the economy. Andy, if the Trump were dumb enough, and I know he's not going to be, to do the $600 a week additional benefits for the next 6 months, as Pelosi wants, we estimate that would cost the U.S. economy 8 million jobs. 8 million fewer jobs by December. And why? Because you're just not going to get people back on the job. People aren't stupid. If you pay them not to work, they're not going to go back on the job.
Kasey, want to weigh?
Well, I think just to echo what he said at the end there, it's real important to realize too that nobody's going to open a new business, and that's what we're worried about, right? Is new businesses opening, because when you're faced with the consequences of let's say I want to expand my restaurant. Why would I expand my restaurant when I know there's nobody to find to work? So that's what you're really affecting. It's affecting the future. And future job growth. So yeah, I echo that totally. And then also on the debt piece, yeah, I mean, it's above my pay grade, but I really just don't see how you keep printing money, and maybe they're not taking $1 from you, but they're making that $1 in your pocket worth 50 cents. And so indirectly by printing all this money, that's what's occurring, and inflation to me is a huge concern, because at the end of the day, there's got to be productivity for money. Otherwise, it's a shell game.
All of your answers provide a really good insight into economics. We often think economics is arithmetic, when in many ways economics is the study of human values and decision making, which all of you are talking about. Here's a question, and this is more local. In Cobb County, only 7.5 million of the 50 million in grants for small businesses was granted last week, according to a local newspaper. How can we address delivery delays, whether it's Cobb or other parts of Georgia, for small businesses?
So are you referring to the $50 million in the PPP money, or is that
Well,
referral?
it says 50 million in small business grants. I'm not sure if it's money directly from the feds to government to small businesses, but someone is saying that, you know what, we only got 7.5 million in Cobb County.
Well, I
It's
think
stimulus money,
that's
actually.
okay, I got you. So,
Yeah.
so I think that that's just an indicator of, when the government gets involved in things, even though they're trying to do a good thing, it's really inefficient, and it picks winners and losers. So if I happen to have an accountant and a banking relationship, I'm able to get my PPP loan through a lot quicker than somebody that doesn't. And so that's what's happening is you see that as great as these programs were, they also picked winners and losers in the marketplace. So that's my concern, but I don't know how you address that at a county level.
Sure.
I just add one quick thing to this, which is this isn't particular to Cobb County, but I mentioned the fact that Pelosi wants some $800 trillion of aid to state and local governments. Guess what? We've already given at the federal level $150 billion to states and cities. That's a lot of money, $150 billion. And a lot of that money still hasn't even been spent yet. Andy, you may know the numbers, but they're large. I mean, at least a third of that money hasn't been spent by the states and cities. Now we're going to give them another $800 billion on top of that. And they haven't even spent the money that we've already given them. And so the problem you're talking about there in Georgia, that's happening around the country. The states and cities are just holding on to the money.
Yeah, one way to deal with this, what they tried to do what they tried to do at the federal level was to use the banks to distribute the Paycheck Protection Program loans. So you tie into the financial infrastructure. Another way to do it if you're going to provide benefits to businesses, if you're going to try and get them some money, another way to do it might be to use the insurance infrastructure. The insurance industry already has a system out there. They're turning down these business interruption claims based on the pandemic. What the federal government could do is fund the insurance companies so that they could pay these business interruption benefits. And if that's in fact what they did, then you kind of tie into the insurance industry's infrastructure. What Steve said is right. What I've heard anywhere from 60 to 85 billion of the 150 billion hasn't been distributed. So you've got a bunch of money out there, and it's what some of those monies are what President Trump is trying to use to cover this $100 of this $400 unemployment supplement. But if you tied into infrastructure, the government really is inefficient at doing this. The government really can't handle something like this. They need to tie into some private sector infrastructure. They tried to do it with the banks, and I think it was as successful as a program with the government could be. If they tied into the insurance industry infrastructure, I think it might even be more successful.
Yeah. Just to follow back up on that piece too, it was. I think that we will also see that because of this $600 sales tax revenue in the local jurisdiction has been pretty good, and so some of our highest months locally with our tax revenue were these past 3 months. I mean, I think our second highest month ever in local sales tax was collected in June. So I don't know that if you've operated the way Georgia has operated through this pandemic, you will see very minimal stress on that, at least the local level revenue. Now, what does that look like when property taxes are doing all that stuff? Sure, there may be some issues, but I think from a short term, looking at it short term, it actually they've given local and state money both directly through the programs you're talking about, but also through the additional money spent for sales tax revenue.
All three of you are big supporters of the free market system, as am I. Here's a question from one of our viewers. As the private sector finds its way out of this crisis, which innovations have a chance of driving future economic growth? And that could be within the existing businesses that we have, or Kasey, as you mentioned, the ones that should start up. What are some of your ideas based upon what you know about the economy, what you know about business?
Is that the question just for me, or was it for everybody?
Oh, it's for everyone.
Okay. I guess I'll start first because I just stole the screen, but basically I think that we hit on it earlier about delivering our products, no matter what industry you're in. I think you're going to see a continual change in how products are delivered to the consumer. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there, no matter what industry you are. Is how do we get, continue to evolve and get our products to the consumer? That's what I see. I definitely am concerned about what we're seeing real estate wise, commercial real estate, and what does office space look like over the next decade as people will start doing these Zoom meetings and working remotely. So to me, that's an industry that would scare the dickens out of me. But I do think you'll see some growth in delivery mechanisms.
Good.
Yeah, consumers' purchasing habits have changed very significantly. I've got as an example, my 98-year-old mother who lives she's independent living. She's very spry, but she lives in a nursing home. And if you'd asked her 3 months ago about Amazon, she would have thought you were talking about a river in Brazil. Now she's the queen of Amazon. The boxes keep coming and coming. People's habits have changed. I'm ordering on Uber Eats, and I never did that before this pandemic, but I'm sure going to keep doing it afterwards. So you're really seeing a period of time where delivery is just having an incredible impact. And I think Amazon has been the leader in this area, obviously, but businesses that can adapt, businesses that can find ways to deliver their product that are creative are going to do very well. And even the real estate sector has to be more creative. Simon Properties is actually negotiating with Amazon to open up warehouses in some of their malls where they had these huge department stores. Well, if you're Amazon can store goods in there, and they also probably could sell, could open a retail facility in these malls as well. So people are going to have to adjust. Things have changed. Things are going to be very different. Kasey's absolutely correct about the impact on commercial real estate. You're going to find even residential real estate in cities like New York, where people, why live in New York? Your taxes are super high. The police department is becoming less and less effective. Why not live in Connecticut or Westport or Florida or Connecticut? So things are changing fast, but I think the real emphasis is going to be on delivery and creativity with the current assets that you have.
So I would just add to what Andy was saying and to what you were saying, Kasey, is that, look, the government isn't going to lead us out of this crisis. I just get so frustrated that everybody keeps thinking the government is going to be the solution to this crisis. It isn't. It's going to be incredible innovation and technology and the next big thing. And incidentally, none of us even know what the next big thing is going to be. That's what's cool about a free market economy. We don't know what it's going to be, but I do know this, Andy. The government sure as hell doesn't know what the next big thing is. I mean, I'm so frustrated when I hear these politicians say, "Oh, we have to invest." I think in Biden's budget, there's $2 trillion. Again, we're spending trillions of dollars the way we used to spend billions of dollars. $1 trillion, by the way, is $1 million. He wants to spend $2 trillion on windmills and solar panels. Well, wait a minute, because they say, well, everyone knows that's the future. How do they know? I mean, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Maybe it's going to be natural gas. Maybe it's going to be hydrogen. Maybe it's going to be, but the idea that the government is going to pick these winners and losers is a really, really bad idea. Let the free market, we didn't need the government for Microsoft. We didn't need it for Amazon. We didn't need it for Google. We didn't need it for the internet. I know Al Gore thinks he invented the internet, but folks, he didn't. And so this is really important that we just let the free enterprise system works. I mean, Andy, you wrote that. What was your book again? Capitalist Comeback, right?
Yep, that's right.
Capitalism is magic. It really is. It leads to these incredible innovations that will change our world in such a productive way. Who's going to find the vaccine? And it's not going to be government. It's going to be these private companies. And by the way, it's the profit motive. Profit. Oh, what a terrible thing. But it's the profit motive that is really motivating a lot of these companies to go out there and find that vaccine that's going to save potentially tens, if not hundreds of millions of lives globally. So I just want to put in, because Georgia Policy Foundation does such a great job of promoting free enterprise and freedom. And, this is a critical time, and freedom is under assault. Freedom is really under assault. Capitalism is under assault. These leftists really believe government is going to lead us out of this, and we need to really strike back at that and say, No, it's the incredible entrepreneurial spirit of the American people. We don't know who it's going to come from, what it's going to be, whether it's going to be in artificial intelligence or whether it's going to be in cloud technology or what it might be. But this is an incredibly exciting future that we face. I mean, I was in Silicon Valley just about 4 or 5 months ago, and just amazing things that are going on in the technological field. And one last thing, I would make the case that it was our technology industry that played a much bigger role than government in terms of getting us through this pandemic. I mean, imagine we wouldn't be able to have this meeting. We wouldn't have gotten, Andy, you wouldn't have been able to receive Uber Eats and all of these incredible new companies that are coming along if it weren't for the ingeniousness of the public, of the private sector. And I'll say it again, the profit motive. I mean, liberals think profit is evil. No. Losses are evil. Profits are a good thing.
You know, Steve, there's actually a section in Joe Biden's website. If you go to his campaign website, there's actually a section that talks about government aid to, quote, deserving companies. That's exactly what he called deserving companies. The idea being government favored companies, which we know how well that worked out when President Obama tried it. This is socialism. This is a result of this Sanders, Ocasio-Cortez, Biden unity platform. And it's a big danger. You're right. Our system is under threat.
One of the questions that we asked the 6,941 people in 47 states is, do you plan on starting a business? And in Georgia, it was 90% of the people said yes, they at least given thought about starting a new business.
What was that percent? Did you just say?
90. 90?
Wow. Awesome.
Idea of starting. Now, again, before COVID-19, if you asked today, I think the number would still be, relatively high. What do all three of you say to people who are thinking about starting a business, let's say a month from now? What should they be thinking about, whether it's regulatory challenges, whether it's investment? Where can they go based upon all that as people who influence business and the economy?
I'll just say a lot of this is going to depend. A lot of it's going to depend on what government economic policies we have out there. Now, Steve has mentioned that Joe Biden, if he's elected, has said he wants to spend $2 trillion on climate change legislation, about $700 billion with a bill to empower unions, and about $775 billion to create government jobs. That's a ton of government spending, and this was the Obama-Biden philosophy too. We're going to have this $800 billion stimulus bill. It's going to stimulate the economy. Unemployment will never go below 8%. Well, it went below 8% the month that bill was passed and stayed below 8% for the next 42 months. Then this government spending, as Steve said, does not drive economic growth. And small businesses know that. Business owners know that. Government spending is going to go away. It may be driving up sales taxes, as Kasey said, for a couple of months, but that's not going to last. This is going to go away, and you don't invest. You don't create a business based on an income stream that will disappear. You don't grow your existing business based on an income stream will disappear. This is why government spending does not drive economic growth. It was important to get us through a crisis. Government certainly has a role in getting us through a crisis, but when the crisis ends, the government needs to step back. This spending will simply drive up our debt. It will not increase our economic growth, and it will not encourage people to grow businesses. So if we're going to see what we saw during the Obama era, which is stagnation, we will not see new businesses and job growth and economic growth. We need these free market policies, tax cuts, regulatory cuts, a focus on domestic energy production, trade agreements that focus on America and on American jobs. And then we'll see people out there opening jobs. At 90% of people in Georgia will have every opportunity in the world to be successful. They'll have every opportunity in the world to feed their families and benefit their communities, but only if they have the freedom to do so.
Okay. Others?
Yeah, so I would probably say from my standpoint, if I was opening a business in the next 6 months, I would definitely evaluate industries that are heavily use employees and figure out a way to develop a model that doesn't heavily use employees in that industry. Because I think at the end of the day, your model better be, how can I do something somebody else is doing with half the employees? And I think that will help you a long way in being successful. And the other thing is, I don't know what everybody's stance is on the tariffs in China, but I can tell you from a manufacturing standpoint in Northwest Georgia, we currently have nine businesses that make LVT that are planning on opening manufacturing facilities over the next 6 to 8 months. So however you feel about tariffs, I don't know that I'm necessarily a big fan of them, but I think it has caused industry that's production overseas to come to America. And so to me, that's a very, very promising thing to see that, that there will be jobs and industry has realized the importance of being in the United States to sell to the citizens of America. So, I mean, that's some interesting things that are going on as far as up here in Northwest Georgia.
So Andy and I do a lot of talks, or we used to, on college campuses when there were college campuses, where they were actually teaching school. And one of the things that I always say to young people is, one of the highest callings, if you want to help your fellow man, and we all want to, contribute to our society and our country and to the well-being of our fellow citizens. The single most important thing you can do, maybe other than being a priest or a preacher, is to create a business and employ people. I mean, what more can you do, right, Andy, to help people than to give them a job? And we need to exalt small businessmen and women in this country even more than we do. And it's not easy. The statistics show that well over 2 out of 3 new businesses in America fail. And, by the way, I've started 3 enterprises in my lifetime. 2 of them failed. One of them was a modest success, but we employed people, and it's an amazing thing. You feel good about yourself when you actually provide somebody with a paycheck. And so for the young people listening to this, if you really want to make a contribution to society, start a business, right, Andy?
Absolutely. That's absolutely the best thing they could do for themselves, their families, and their communities.
Well, to the 90% who say they want to start a job, I think all of them are excited. And Stephen, I would add educator to priest as well. Here's the last question, and then,
by the way, we need great teachers. We need to get rid of bad teachers. We need, great teachers are worth their weight in gold, and they should be paid a lot more, and bad teachers should be out, right? This is the only profession where we don't reward success.
Got it. Here's the last question. With all this talk on stimulus, it's mostly aimed at a safety net approach. What can you recommend we do to stimulate private investment and let that drive how we invest in the economy?
Cut government spending as much as possible. I mean, seriously, government spending is crowding out private investment in the economy right now. Those statistics, Andy, that you just went through about, Biden's going to spend $2 trillion on this and another $1 trillion on that and $1 trillion on that. Well, that money can only come from, reducing the amount of private investment that goes into businesses. So, I think the idea of really starting to think about whether we need to spend $2 or $3 trillion more is good for the economy. And the other thing, and Donald Trump has said in just the last 48 hours that he wants to do a cut in the capital gains tax, which leads to more private investment, because the capital gains tax is a direct tax on small business startups.
And Steve got, that's the essence of it. Reduce government spending. The only thing I would add is to encourage profit. Do whatever you can to encourage businesses to profit, reduce taxes, reduce regulation, because people invest. They invest their capital in companies and businesses where they believe there's going to be a profit. So if you want to increase private investment, increase the potential for profit, get government out of the way, and you'll see the economy soar.
Thank you. Kasey.
I'm just going to say yes, yes, and yes on all that, guys. Good job.
Well, Stephen, Kasey, and Andy, thank you again for your words of wisdom. Thank you for your commitment to free market principles, to common sense, and to some tough love. There are a lot of people across the country who are trying to figure out how to make sense of this, both inside of government and outside. I think provided some really good food for thought. And with that, Kyle, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Gerard. And thanks to all of our panelists. That was a very spirited and interesting discussion about such an important topic. And I really appreciate your participation this morning and your insight. Thank you for that. We'll be watching how this adaptation in our economy unfolds over the coming weeks and months. Before we conclude, I'd like to thank our sponsors one more time. Our presenting sponsor, AT&T, our platinum sponsors, Verizon and the Walton Family Foundation, and our silver sponsor, the Georgia Association of Realtors. I'd also like to remind everyone to join us next week as we continue exploring adaptation with a look at housing. We'll begin at 11 a.m. next Tuesday, August 18th. We hope you'll all be able to join us. Until then, thank you for being with us this morning, and we are adjourned.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great day.
Yeah, it was a pleasure, everybody. Good to see everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.